Ever since its inception, there's been a meta within League of Legends, a set of unspoken rules and standards for how the game should be optimally played. As is the case for every competitive and even non-competitive game, the community and occasionally the developers themselves collect information, empirical data, and statistics to determine what is strong and efficient and what is weak and impractical. That, in its simplest form, is what a meta is. Given that Riot implements balance adjustments on a bi-weekly basis, the relative strength and effectiveness of champions, items, and in-game systems are constantly changing, forcing players to remain adaptive and up-to-date at all times. Within the overarching meta exists many smaller metas, namely between ranks. What is considered optimal in Silver, for instance, may vastly differ from what is optimal in Challenger due to the variance in skill expression, mechanics, and macro knowledge of the game working for or against a champion's proficiency. It's almost a governing law that the best way to climb is to follow the meta, take advantage of whoever and whatever is strong to increase your chances of winning. But time after time, in the almost 14 years the game has been out for, a small fraction of players have proven that it's still possible to find success at even the upper echelons of solo queue utilizing a strategy that doesn't follow prevailing wisdom. Sometimes this divergent approach to the game ironically finds its way into mainstream relevance. Having made a video on off-meta being creative or troll back in 2021, I want to revisit this topic and go a bit more in depth on it by breaking down what exactly is the difference between a genuinely viable off-meta strategy and a blatant troll pick. That being said, I highly suggest you watch that video if you haven't yet, as I talked about the pros and cons of playing off-meta, whereas in this one my aim is to help you better understand what is a creative, unorthodox playstyle and what is blatantly inting. Unsurprisingly, when it comes to off-meta, everyone has a differing opinion. No matter how much evidence to the contrary, there will always be that one person who advocates Yuumi jungle being the most OP freelo strategy you can think of. On the flip side, there may be someone who believes there is no such thing as a viable off-meta strategy because if it's viable, it's considered meta. Both sides are correct in a way. Historically speaking, metas are known for their impermanence, regardless of what game you play. Even a title that never has a single balance patch can run through dozens of iterations on tier lists as the competitive scene matures and develops. Super Smash Bros. Melee is the most appropriate example of this. The most recent official quote-unquote tier list came out back in March 2021, placing Yoshi at rank 10 and Jigglypuff at rank 3. But at one point, way back in October of 2002, Jigglypuff and Yoshi were ranked 17 and 19 respectively, placements that would be considered low tier. Just because a strategy or character is perceived as bad by the general public doesn't mean they're actually so. It could just stem from a lack of experimentation and exploration or inconclusive data. Then again, the term meta implies efficiency. Therefore, if there's a deviant strategy that is successful, it is in fact a meta strategy, just not one many people know about. A good friend of mine and fellow content creator Happy Chime Noise has based his entire channel around off-meta picks that garnered enough success for players to reach Master, Grandmaster, even Challenger, featuring picks that range from reasonable such as full crit AD Olaf to the most outlandish pick and build you could ever think of like John at top. Funnily enough, some of his videos became viral enough that said off-meta strategy achieved mainstream attention to the point where Riot themselves had to do something about it. In fact, after releasing his videos on Yuumi, Janna, and Rakan top, the Bounce team had to completely readjust support items, namely Spell Thief's Edge, to only work if an allied champion was nearby. One could argue that there is simultaneously a meta and no meta at all, but that's really what metas are in video games, an abstract set of methods and trends among those who play them. If we really want to be technical about it, there is no such thing as a troll pick since anything can work. Obviously, that's not the answer you want to hear though, neither do I. The last thing I want is for some idiot to justify insta-locking full AP Jarvan mid because they want to be the next viral thing on Reddit. No matter how many off-meta picks or strategies are discovered, they're innately less efficient than meta strategies for many reasons. To understand what constitutes viable off-meta, you have to be in the meta first. Unlike what most people think, you can't just go on Ultimate Bravery and try out a random champion into a random role with a random build and hope for the best. If it were that easy, everyone would do it. It should go without saying that the majority of off-metas are objectively less efficient than the on-metas. For example, a video Chimes made earlier this year was on AD Sylas. What do we know about Sylas? For one, he's primarily an AP skirmisher. Chainlash is a damaging skill shot with a 130% AP ratio. Kingslayer is a targeted dash whose damage and healing scale off 90 and 80 AP respectively. Abduct is a bandage toss dash-like ability with the 100% AP ratio. All of his basic abilities require ability power. But as I'm sure we all know, a good amount of his DPS comes from Petricite Burst, transforming his basic attack to deal AoE damage to all nearby targets after using an ability, giving him bonus attack speed while in possession of stacks, and having a 130% AD plus 25% AP ratio on the primary target and 40 plus 20 to non-primary targets. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that ability power is measurably more effective to build than attack damage, as his entire kit scales off ability power whereas one scales off AD. However, he does naturally weave in auto attacks between his abilities, therefore he can take advantage of any on-hit and or spellblade properties, as demonstrated in this video where he runs Blade of the Ruined King, Divine Sunder, and Muramana. None of these items are nearly as useful on him compared to an actual on-hit attacker like say Jax or Aurelia, but there is a semblance of synergy, bringing us to step 1. Does the build make sense? Another example I want to look at is Full Crit Olaf, where you go Immortal Shieldbow, Collector, and Infinity Edge. Once again, crit chance isn't really the most ideal stat to build on Olaf, seeing as he's an immobile juggernaut whose damage output is evenly split between abilities and auto attacks, and he tends to get kited really hard unless you build Stridebreaker. Although, Olaf is notorious for gaining ludicrous amounts of attack speed from his passive and W, letting him basically reach the attack speed cap without building a single item with that stat. If you also factor in his ultimate granting him bonus attack damage when activated, it's very common for Olaf to reach 400, 500, even 600 AD towards the late game. Most AD carries have only around 300 since they have to build attack speed. Full Crit Olaf does basically like 1000 damage per auto with only like 3 completed items. It's a risky strategy given your forfeiting defensive stats that he desperately needs, but the potential is still there. Above all else, the build has to make sense. You can't go AP Darius because he has no AP ratios, and nothing in his kit takes advantage of AP items enough to even be worth considering. On to step 2, do the circumstances make sense? And this is where I think a lot of players fail to differentiate clever off meta from dumb as fuck. Every champion finds a home in one of the 5 roles despite there being no rule imposed on them from the game that obligates you to put them there. Evelyn's a jungler because her camouflage allows her to sneak into other lanes and catch enemy laners off guard. Fiora's a top laner because the isolated 1v1 nature of top lane suits her playstyle quite well. Emilio's a support because, well, it's pretty obvious he wants to swim with a buddy. But that doesn't mean that's the only place you can use them in. Renekton is a champion you frequently see in top lane, but every so often he might make his way into mid lane. Why? 2 things. 1, he has a really good burst trade combo that's usually strong enough to one-shot or at the very least gravely wound his opponent with only a few items. More often than not, he outtrades most mages. 2, he's an anti-carry, extremely good at shutting down most if not every assassin in the mid lane. Echo, Kiana, Yasuo, Katarina, Akali, Yone, Kassadin, Talon, Sylas, what have you. Therefore, the circumstances are favorable enough to see him fielded in mid lane. This stretches beyond roles though. You can also factor in playstyles. The most famous, or depending on who you ask, infamous case study of this is our dear old friend Babus, aka the Boss FFS, and his patented Inting Sion. This version of Sion is still played top lane, but instead of going full tank, he goes full AD, and instead of grouping with a team as you typically would on Sion, he straight up runs it down a lane, brute forcing his way through towers until he eventually backdoors the enemy nexus. For starters, the build. Sion has 2 abilities with fantastic AD ratios, Decimating Smash, which has a staggering 2.25% total AD ratio at full charge, and Unstoppable Onslaught, which only has 80% bonus AD, but my god, that base damage is beautiful. One other thing is that his passive Glory in Death grants him 1.75 attack speed and deals 10% max health on hit bonus damage. The reason Inting Sion works is because you can take advantage of Sion's deceptively high damage output, especially while dead, and since he's already dead, anything and everything he does while dead is a net positive for him. That includes tower damage. Building full AD on Sion turns his otherwise benign passive into a terrifying force, to the point where the enemy team is more afraid of you when you're dead instead of alive. At the same time, they can't just ignore you while in this state lest you rip towers to shreds. This places the enemy team in a very uncomfortable scenario where they want to get away from you as fast as possible after they kill you, but they also have to fight you to get rid of your corpse quickly. Soul Furnace's infinite scaling is also a major contributor to the viability of this off-meta strategy, as it allows Sion to continuously scale with or without kills, and provided you're good at last hitting, the bonus HP accumulation is high enough to somewhat offset all the gold you give to the enemy team from dying. The absurdity of this strategy, both in how degenerate and applicable it was, prompted Riot to nerf his passive to deal less than half damage to towers. Mind you, Inting Sion is a very specific edge case. A more simple example of step 2 would be something like Pantheon support. So back when Pantheon got his VGU, his kit was unexpectedly proficient down in bot lane for a multitude of reasons. He had a point and click dash that could stun for 1 second, a damaging ability that doubled as a long range poke tool with very high base damage, and applied a slow for 2.5 seconds, and his ultimate was fantastic for roaming to other lanes or heck even ganking his own lane. But what really hit the nail on the head was Aegis Assault, his new E, where for 1.5 seconds he would be immune to any and all damage dealt by hostile units from a target direction. This included tower shots. When using the empowered version, it would extend from 1.5 to 2.5 seconds. Pantheon was, with no caveat, no asterisk, the best at tower diving bot lane thanks to being able to tank tower shots for his team at no risk to his own life, hence why they found gainful employment as a support before they nerfed and reworked him again. On the opposite side of the rift, as mentioned earlier, top lane was overrun by enchanter supports during early 2022. Janna, Karma, Sona, Soraka, Rakan, Yuumi even. In fact, most of the time they weren't even top lane at all. They just perma-roamed all game and only occasionally went top when there was nothing better to do. Unlike Pantheon support, there wasn't really anything within their kits that made them find success up there. If anything, it was a massive punch in the face to top laners. They basically demonstrated how useless the role was by playing an enchanter and roaming all game. Something that makes no sense would be split push jungle Renata. Renata has barely any wave clear, she's super easy to take down when caught, her jungle clear speed is non-existent, and her passive and ultimate are almost worthless in 1v1 scenarios. There is no rhyme or reason behind jungle split push Renata because the circumstances you're putting her in don't make sense. That's what it boils down to. When you look at every one of Chimes' videos, you have to ask yourself the question, does it make sense? Does the build make sense? Do the circumstances make sense? Assassin Vi makes sense. She has a very good burst combo. Echo support is not practical, but makes sense. Parallel Convergence has one of the longest stun durations in the game, especially for an AoE ability. AP Tahm Kench makes sense. Tongue Lash is a fantastic low cooldown long range poke tool, and his passive W and ultimate have excellent AP scaling. AP Shen makes sense. Q is a decent AP ratio, and you get ridiculously giant shields from your ultimate. No matter how ridiculous the pick, there has to be some degree of logic behind it. The more logical it is, the more likely it is to be successful. Are there times where a pick appears to make absolutely no sense at all but still works? Of course, but chances are the player knows something we don't. Obviously the Grandmaster Yone jungle has a very deep understanding of jungle fundamentals to make a champion like Yone work. The challenger Kai'Sa top probably has an extensive amount of knowledge on top lane matchups and threat windows to make Kai'Sa work, leading us to the final step, the player's own skill level. At the start of the video, I brought up how within the meta, there are smaller metas depending on the role. That's another thing to make note of. A rookie mistake everyone makes when trying to follow an off-meta strategy is by thinking they can monkey see, monkey do. Sorry to say, but if it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. Many champions in low elo perform significantly worse the higher up you go, given players know how to take them on better. Down in Gold and Silver, top laners like Dr. Mundo, Mordekaiser, Nasus, and Yorick have 52 to 54% win rates, whereas in Diamond Plus, all of them have below 50. Certain off-meta picks are rank agnostic due to their simplicity. Crit Olaf top merely tweaks the build around, you still more or less play Olaf the same way. Full AD Vi is also easy to pick up, you just have to be more selective about when to go in since you can't really punch your way out. But for a more multifaceted off-meta strat like Inting Sion, there's a lot of things you have to be aware of and consider since you're skirting a very fine line between tactical Inting and just regular Inting. While we're talking about that, when Inting Sion got nerfed, his win rate actually went up as players returned to standard tank Sion since the vast majority of Inting Sion bandwagoners thought they could just die as many times as they wanted and still win. That's not how that works. Likewise, certain off-meta strategies in low elo don't work in high elo. You might be able to get away with fully p-singed mid lane in bronze, but challengers are smart enough to take advantage of your squishy melee nature. So it's a balance of how smart you are and how ignorant the enemy team is. Overall, the difference between an off-meta and troll pick is ambiguous, but one thing is for certain, there is a higher likelihood of an off-meta pick or strategy failing than succeeding, which is why they're off-meta. Despite countless stories of players who reach high elo taking a divergent approach to the game, the meta is there for a reason. It's the most efficient and mathematically consistent way to climb. If it wasn't the case, players wouldn't follow it. Not gonna lie, this was one of the more enjoyable topics I've written in a while. I was initially hesitant to make the video because I thought it would be too similar to the previous off-meta video, but looking back, there's a lot more I can talk about regarding this topic. Let me know in the comments down below if you found this insightful, as well as your own thoughts on what the difference is between off-meta and troll pick. Aside from that, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Also consider following me on Twitter at VarsVerum, joining my Discord server, and don't forget to watch that other off-meta video if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next one. Take care.